Serenbe is a place where people live, work, learn, and play in celebration of life's beauty. And we're here to share the stories that connect residents and guests to each other and to nature. This is Serenbe Stories. Steve, here we are again. We're on episode 8. Welcome back.
Thank you.
We are going to talk about today how the first house broke ground, and not only really about the first house breaking ground, but how in the world did you get people to move here without anything here? Just a bunch of trees and woods and an idea. What did you do?
Wow, that does take me back a few years. It all seems now so it happened. But as I think about it, I've talked about how we got caught up in what needed to be done. And so this was just sort of stepping into this. And we were busy in 2001 and 2 bringing a community together, then changing the overlay regulations, and then transfer development rights. And so this whole time I'd been thinking about what we would do with our land, and we had been designing a basic plan. And then, of course, I hit that stumbling block I mentioned about that all the investors I thought would be so excited to join me in this venture didn't. And now I find out they laughed all the way back to Atlanta. And so then it was that challenge to finance it somehow, because I'd passed through that threshold of passion that we had to do it. And so I was totally focused on the idea that we had to get it done. I never thought about, was anyone going to buy a house here?
Right.
Again, that just seemed like the natural. Of course they would if I built it. Looking back, I was really naive, but I was naive enough to really ride that wave of passion that this had to be done. Mm-hmm. And that it was so obvious to me that once people saw it, we always hear the story of Steve Jobs and the iPhone. How could you? Mm-hmm. No one was buying an iPhone before they saw it. And
right, so they didn't know they needed it.
Well, I didn't have that direct correlation. I was in that same attitude that I just knew it was the right thing, and so we just had to move forward. Mm-hmm. And so the whole time I was going through this process of trying to raise money, we had worked with Robert Rausch and Ryan Gainey to develop a image box, because here we were in this forest. There wasn't much going on. And so we wanted something that we could touch that really communicated in a very artistic way that we were doing something different. And working with Robert and Ryan, we came up with this fabulous box and the tagline that we were going to build a community of people in a community of trees. And an entire imagery that came through that. And we picked up an acorn from the woods here and had that cast in bronze to go on each of these boxes. And you lifted a little door, and there was the whole hand cut out image of someone walking through the woods into a village.
So tell me a little bit about the box. We have one here at the table, and we'll put it online so everybody can see a picture. But tell me about a box. Like, how big is the box? Like, describe it for us.
So this box is probably about 10 by 14, and it's all custom wood, stained dark. And on the very top is a little door, and you can see that you could open it, and you use the acorn as the handle to open this box. This just a fourth maybe of the surface of the top. And you open that, and here you have this hand cut image.
It's like a pop-up book almost, like a kid's book.
Exactly.
When you open the handle. We
commissioned an artist to do the hand drawing, and then commissioned an artist to do the hand cut. And so you just don't see that. But this was really the beginning in a lot of ways to say, this is honoring concepts and principles that we haven't seen for a while, but that touches us all in very meaningful ways.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
And the acorn, that to really start to open that story, you had to touch the acorn. And the acorn is a seed of new thought, we felt. And that was our representation of what we were doing. We were very aware we were doing something new and that we were planting a seed for a different way for community development that we haven't seen in a while. And then because we were going to be doing something so out of the box, we felt that it was appropriate to look in the box to see what we were up to. And so on the right side of the box is a branch, again, that was picked up from the property and cast in bronze. And you use that as the handle to open, and the entire top of the box slides out. And then you see in there a book, and it is full of hand drawings that really began to communicate what we were doing. And it has the maps, what we were planning to do here. The original maps. And then there is a beautiful quote carved into the wood from A.J. Downing. Yeah. And so that really, without saying anything, communicated to people that it was something very special. And so that was for my investor crowd that also, we had about 7 of them, I think, that then also we had around when people came to visit to communicate what we were about to. Once I had secured the funds, we realized, we need to let people know we were going to really be doing houses, you know. And so again, working with Robert and Ryan, we developed a mailer for anybody that we knew. And here again, we wanted to communicate that we were doing something very authentic. We were in the rural landscape, but this was a very sophisticated approach. And this mailer, and I believe we have one here, and we can get that, but it was taking traditional brown cardboard and cutting an opening and putting a screen, almost a rusted looking screen, and it shared what we were doing just in very basic terms. And this was all mailed in a burlap little bag, pouch, right? in a bag. You know, here I am 16 years later, and I still run into people, some really important type people that tell me that flyer is still on their bookshelf. It was that unique that they had never seen it before, and it was so simple. So it did the two things at once. It was just, wow.
Where did you get that idea? Because, I mean, I think, you know, as a marketing person, you know, large corporations maybe still send out, or we did back in the day when I worked for a large corporation, we would send out to press, you know, these really interactive 3D handheld pieces that really communicated whatever we were launching, you know, and that was sort of the big thing that we did. But I don't know if that still happens anymore. Like, where did you get that idea? Was that something you used in hospitality?
No, it was really working with Robert and Ryan, and we wanted to go back to something very basic, but that opened your imagination in a way. And I don't know if they still do those wonderful cutout books. Pop-up books.
Oh yeah, they still do them.
They still. Yeah. So the idea of, I mean, that was kind of magical, and we knew it was very important to have something very simple but elegant, and those are easy words to say, but when you start a project to have simple and elegant, when you head towards the elegant, you tend to be a little over-polished generally.
Yeah.
And I think as you see Serenbe today, one of the things we hear is it's so authentic looking. Yeah. And it's because we have continued to have that elegant simplicity that has carried us through as we've built the community. And so it's very obvious. And so here we had to communicate these concepts in a very easy way. And I had really sort of resigned myself to the fact that this was going to be very slow going because people were just not catching on to what I was talking about, is what I felt, because the financial and regulatory community had been so difficult. So I realized the kids were headed off to college and that we didn't need the big farmhouse and we could turn that into an inn, and we should build a townhouse, because even people that began to believe I was going to do something was thinking these little rural houses, little rural estates. Right. And when I said townhouses and live works, it just like, it could not comprehend.
Who puts a townhouse in the woods?
There just was not a match.
Doesn't make sense. Yeah.
So I said, well, we'll build the first townhouse and people can understand that. And of course, being hospitality, we'll do the first a coffee shop. We have to have a coffee shop.
Mm-hmm.
And so we would do that. And we knew how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then my sister-in-law was visiting from California, and she said, "Oh, I love this idea. I'll buy." And in fact, that was the weekend we built the labyrinth. That they were all here, and I took them on a walk after the labyrinth, and we had just started staking the roads to see where it was. And we walked through the woods, and we would come to stakes, and I'd say, "This is what's got to go there." And the wood, not a tree had been taken down; it was just stakes in the middle of a woods.
Wow! So did you even have a road going through, like even a gravel road?
No,
Nothing. Just stakes in the woods.
Stakes in the woods.
Wow. So you sold Serenbe, or you sold people into Serenbe with the box and the mailer and some stakes in the woods.
And visiting. And so that was the first house.
Okay.
She said that she would do a house.
Uh-huh.
And then a friend said he would do an estate house.
Okay.
So I thought, hey, we're going to have 4 buildings.
This is great.
And of course, I've heard Robert Davis tell the story of Seaside and how they put a lemonade stand out to try to get people, and they literally did it brick by brick on the streets, and it was one house at a time. And so I thought, well, that's sort of
maybe that's how it's done.
We'll go house by house. People will gradually get it. You know, I realized we didn't have the traffic to put a lemonade stand anywhere, but and so that's really how we began. But then once I really had the money secured for that, begin the infrastructure, I decided I better let people know we were really ready to sell. And so people that had expressed interest either from getting my mailer or from visiting, we had opened the bed and breakfast at that point on the outer building. I think I've talked about that at some point. So I'd collected all these cards. And so I just did a simple letter, I believe it was, that we were actually going to start construction of the road, or I think maybe I'd actually started the construction on the road at that point. And here was the plan on 40 lots, and here were prices on half of them. And so I had half the townhouses, half the live works, half the cottages, and half the estate house. And I just wanted to let them know. And 48 hours later, all 20 were spoken for.
That's incredible.
And I was amazed. Wow. I mean, this was the first whoa, there really is a market for this.
Right.
And I took the prices up 20% and released the balance of them. And 6 weeks later, they were gone. And so suddenly I had reservations on a bunch of houses and some conceptual house plans and facades and no builders.
Oh,
I mean,
so you didn't,
here I've got my buyers and I've got my land plan, but who's going to build these,
no.
And so the builders we wanted, they weren't building around here. They weren't next door.
They were all up in Atlanta.
They were all in Atlanta and North Atlanta.
Oh.
And so we started calling builders to see who could come meet with us.
Okay.
And that led us into then, when it was like, well, I don't know, South Fulton County, I not think so. And so I said, well, I got 40 pre-sales. What?
Yeah, that's unheard of. Yeah.
And so then they would meet with me, or a couple of them, they didn't stay still, then they'll meet with me. And so that's how we began.
Oh my gosh. So I would think that a developer would listen to this and think like that was the most backwards way to go about planning a neighborhood without builders.
It's totally back. Everything's totally backwards.
Yeah, I know, but it's so fantastic.
This is why the passion piece was leading, And then Angie Mosier, who was a great food stylist and photographer, and we'd gotten to know Angie very well because we conceived the La Danse de l'Escoffier event. And back in those first days, it was basically Angie and us pulling out the tables and making that happen.
Oh, so that had happened. That La Danse had started before.
So well before this, we were already in our 4th or 5th year by the time we were doing this. And so we were talking about this whole thing, and Angie said, "You're going to have a bake shop? Oh my God, that's my fantasy to always have a bake shop. Can I do it?"
So she came in with a baker?
So Angie came in, and she was our first, and then her husband's a musician, and he was tired of being on the road. And so they stepped out of their very successful careers, of both a musician and a food stylist photographer. to open the Blue-Eyed Daisy.
No way. I didn't know that.
That's how.
That's
and
great.
so it was Angie who named it the Blue-Eyed Daisy.
Oh.
And this was a whole story on something very fond to her. And she was fabulous. And it was just great. Of course, as we became busy, Angie found out what it was like to be in the operations side, being the fantasy side. And so she decided she better go back. And now, she's pretty well known.
Very well known. Yeah. That's fantastic.
So, and Johnny's gone back to the music. So
that's great.
Sometimes when you think there's something that you're after, you have to try it so you can go back to what you've been doing.
Exactly.
So
Well, and they were probably the perfect people to open it.
Oh my gosh, how fabulous it was, in those early days, we sat around and it wasn't all, there weren't huge lines clearly. And so there was this just very charming, and it was a destination in the middle of the woods, very unknowns. We had the Blue-Eyed Daisy open by the time the fourth resident moved in.
Wow.
Which again, by developer standards of counting housetops to do any commercial, especially food service, it didn't meet any of those.
Of course not.
And of course, it was not on a main road. In fact, it was in the middle of the woods on a road that we had created.
Yep.
So we've broken all the rules.
It's great. So after the first residents moved in, or sort of the pre-sales, I know that you then were able to take out a loan, and you were able to get one at that point, I think, for the next 120 homes. Is that right?
Well, what happened is all of a sudden I turned around and I had nothing to sell. Now I had a master plan, but I had prepared myself for this long run. And so all of a sudden I had to start for the next phase with all the engineering drawing. And so that's another 8 months before
so it's not
you can even have another lot to sell.
Okay.
So during the period of time that they were really building the houses, I was busy trying to get the next section done.
Okay.
And so that was, so we broke ground in 2004, built those houses in 2004 and 5, started infrastructure on the next section in 2006, and then they were all built out in 2006 and 7 in those houses. And then I did the same thing again.
Down in Grange.
So this was 2007 because actually I had 3 phases to begin with, the first 40, and then the next part of Selborne, and then the Crossroads. So I conservatively did three ways, and it was the Crossroads and Selborne Way, which is where all the townhouses going up that way. And so each time I did it, they would immediately, because now I had builders clamoring for lots. So literally I had lots on the market 24 hours again. I mean, the minute I would release a lot, the builders would take them all down from me.
That's great.
Because we were just doing this incredible job. So I decided this was really great stuff, that I would go ahead and borrow big money, because each time I would totally pay off everything. And I was rolling the money. But if I was going to get ahead of this, this was long haul. You would sell, then 8 months to a year later, you'd had more product to sell. Then I'd have that sold, take the money, and start all over again. So this was a very long ripple. So I decided, so at this point we had about 100 lots that I'd sold. So I decided to double my money or double my gamble or whatever you want to say. And so I borrowed money to do 120 lots.
Okay.
And we did that all at once.
Okay.
Put all that infrastructure all at once. I had contracts from 4 builders basically to take down all the lots that I was willing to sell, which paid off all my debt. And then I had what we refer to as the estate lots that would be my profit, that we would sell those to individuals. But my 4 builders were taking down all the lots that paid off all my loans. It was just brilliant. This development stuff, I decided, was so easy. And of course, we released those lots to the builders at the end of 2007. And then through 2008, the builders started falling one by one. The largest builder we had here was the first to go, who going into it, you would think was the most secure, that would be fine. Well, they were actually the first to go.
Right.
Now, luckily, they all had signed contracts with takedown schedules. And so they'd each only taken down their first group of lots.
Okay.
And so the biggest builder had taken down 7 lots, the smallest had taken down 2 lots, and they had all started on those.
Okay.
So as they started, 2 went bankrupt and 2 just stopped building. And with the 2 bankruptcies, we were able to work with the bank and the builders to finish those and sell them. And we tore up all these contracts
for the remaining.
So luckily, we only had 7 lots that had not started construction that were in foreclosure.
Okay.
So it was the best of what it could be in that very uncomfortable period of time.
Right. One of the things, because I think you did some interesting things in that time period, specifically with the Nest sort of pocket neighborhood, which I want to hear a little bit about. But before you get into that, tell me, did the people who moved in, were they different from one group to another? Meaning, like, were they all retirees or were they all families? Like, did it change as the word got out? And did you envision who was coming to that come to fruition? Like,
absolutely. In that first 40, there was only 1 full-time resident with children.
Okay.
And there were only a couple households, 2 that I can think of, that had children.
As a second home.
As a second home. And so they were mostly empty nesters, either older or younger, but mostly. And I would say 50% of the first buyers were second homes.
Okay.
And so that was sort of the profile that I thought we were headed into. And so in the second group of 40 houses, the other side of Selborne, we designed those houses for the empty nester.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And we said, but there could be 1 or 2 families that come. And we had one house that we really tried to think out what it'd be like for a family. And so, we had playroom planned on the top floor. We had 3 equal bedrooms, a master. It was just going to be the perfect family house. And a 70-year-old couple bought it. And we had families squeezing into the perfect 2-bedroom bungalows. And I realized that
you can't predict.
You can't predict what's going to happen. And then in the crossroads, which was, as you had to drive through the various things, we had a family that had all their toys on the front porch. And my first thought was, oh, that's kind of cluttered. But then so many people I'd see at the Blue Idea, there are families here?
Oh.
And this was about the time of Richard Lou's book and talk about kids to neighborhoods. And so that front porch really was a huge marketing piece in saying there are children living here.
Right. Where you at first thought, oh God, I don't want the plastic toys on the front porch.
That's right.
From
I was
an
like,
aesthetic.
ooh, I don't know.
I don't think I want that. But then you're like, wait. It's a good signifier.
Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I do remember, definitely families that I met when I first moved here that they said that they were sort of the first families, if you will. And then it just seemed to be like a waterfall. Tons of families have moved in, but also still you're 70-year-old, you're empty nesters, you're single. So it's a really great mix, but that wasn't maybe what you had envisioned in the beginning. You just assumed.
Well, I realized I hadn't envisioned, as I've said, I think when we were doing the planning, I hadn't envisioned.
You weren't even sure.
And then when I saw my buyers on the first, I thought, oh, well, I guess that makes sense.
Right.
So I was just kind of going with the flow. And then, the toys and the families and Richard Lou, it was just obvious, perfect for families. And then it's just rolled. And so this is why, and now you see the people that are here, it's a total mix of everything from any way you want to profile people. It's a total mix. And so that remains one of my greatest surprises is the people who moved in here. Not that I had thought about it. I didn't.
Right.
But just the fact I could not have imagined the fabulous mix of interesting people and the diversity of those people.
Yeah. Well, and you were a bit of an outlier by moving your family down here even. People thought that was sort of a wild choice. And so, it would make sense that, people would have second homes or, it who would be empty nesters. So let's get back to the nest. So in Grange, there's this wonderful little, I'll call it a pocket neighborhood of, is it 15 homes?
15 homes.
That was originally.
So in our plan, these were basically the cottage district was quarter acre lots with a 2,300 square foot house. We had tried doing smaller houses, and that wasn't the market in 2007.
Right.
And so then 2008 is the only year we sold absolutely nothing. Now, in the restaurant business, I had certainly had recessions. Of course, with our restaurants, we always seem to do well, so I hadn't really noticed it, but I was aware recessions did happen.
You still have to eat in a recession.
Exactly. And if you were a value, you did better in a recession, actually, than you did others. So, I recognized it was a recession. We were busy, making things happen. And then in 2009, like the rest of the world, we started wondering how soon this was going to be over. It was getting tiresome,
to say the least.
And 2010, I realized that maybe we were into something different than we'd ever experienced, and certainly that's what markets and press, and we were in an unknown period of time. Yeah. And so, what do we do? Because at that point, our plans were for $500,000 houses,
right?
And $500,000 houses were not selling. Nothing was selling. So we took 5 of those cottage lots and redesigned 15 small lots. So we worked with Lou Oliver on that to come up with these plans with 900 square foot houses starting.
Wonderful.
And we thought that this would be something great that we could actually go to market with. Very environmental, so they were all geothermal and solar ready. And if you added solar, you wouldn't have a power bill along with it. And we offered the first cottages for $265,000. So in 2010, that seemed like a real value to have. We'd established about the community and the quality. And we had a lot of interest of people coming down. And that really was one of the things that we were early in stepping out of the recession. And one of my favorite stories is a couple who had been looking. It was a second home. And then we hadn't heard from them like so many people. And so they showed up and they shared with us that, they thought about it, but they decided it was just not responsible in this time of period to have a second home. But $265,000, it was like, well, we could do that and not feel irresponsible. Clearly, it wasn't a cash issue. It was just a matter of not a prudent thing to do. And so they started looking at the plans. They wanted to, of course, expand the bedroom 5 feet, and the property line was 5 feet out the bedroom window. That was impossible. Well, they ended up buying a lot for $280,000. So, and their architectural fees were probably that much as well. So, but it was that change of perception that brought people back, and they all weren't buying those houses, but we started then stepping out. And so in 2010, we really started moving out of this, and we were able to work with one of the builders who had survived. They just stopped building. And so we offered that if they would build a spec house, that they would be our contractor for all those. And so that also lifted them out of the recession with us. So,
well, and I think the small homes, obviously we've had this, since then, this sort of tiny home phenomenon, obviously that sort of caught the eye of everybody culturally, whether it's on wheels or truly a tiny home. But that concept of a 900 square foot home did sell really well. And out of the nest, many of them are. But then you've taken that concept in the newest neighborhood. And that's kind of fascinating because even today, there was some naysayers of nobody's going to buy a 900 square foot home. But tell us a little bit about like what maybe that taught you as far as like product mix and size of homes.
Well, one thing that I believe happened through the recession that we saw is we tried selling smaller houses 2004 or 5, then, not a tiny home, or 900 square foot, but less than 2,500.
Sure.
And people weren't interested. Yeah. They always wanted that bigger house, the bigger. And I think that recession was a readjustment for people and what they really needed. And I think there's more talk about living in community also, because one reason you don't need a larger house at Serenbe is you live in community. And that's a big difference. So I think it was just 5 years of the recession basically was a reset in the market as to what was really important. And the tiny house movement, I think while the tiny house is one product, I think it's really a tagline for an entire movement of living in smaller spaces. And our houses here, our smaller houses, we have a lot now in the 900 to 1,200 square foot. But they're done with great design and light and vaulted ceilings. And they're just, it's good design and interesting design. And one of the things we talk about is living small or living large in small spaces.
Yes.
And that's what we're able to do here because we live in the community. We step out on the streets, on the front porches, in the restaurants, in the theater. It's a huge thing. I think, some of the families that have shared with me how in Atlanta, they had maybe it's even you, Monica, I'm not sure, but when they opened the front door in their city house, they always said, "We're home."
Yeah.
And then once they moved to Serenbe, when they pulled in the front entrance, it was, "We're home."
We're home.
And I think that's a good indication of how people regard living in a community like Serenbe.
Yeah.
The whole place is home.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a very unusual feeling, but it's true. Talking about commercial centers, you did the first restaurant, the Blue Eyed Daisy, but it appears that each of the commercial centers, you really had to stand those up on your own. Do you want to talk a little bit about why you felt like you needed those places, and then sort of what the market said, no, and why you had to do it, and you've continued to do it in each of the neighborhoods. I believe you've built all the commercial.
Well, we were very clear in the beginning that we were a mixed-use community, and no different than towns 100 years ago. There was always a little store and the little food something, whether it was a grocery store, the little drugstore, coffee shop, and I really was adamant that we had to have that same thing. But of course, in the traditional development lingo, you had to count housetops within your immediate area in order to make that viable. Oh. And to get any kind of funding, you had to show those kind of markets, and that just didn't exist.
Right.
And there, in the financial community, there's not a line that talks about being placemakers.
Right.
and we were creating a destination. We weren't serving an existing population.
Right.
And that's a very different thing when you're talking about the funding sources to do this. But I felt so strongly about it that I realized we couldn't have a bedroom community with just one coffee shop, that there had to be more to it. And while we had the Live Work, we'd sold the Live Works, and so we had the art gallery, and we had a little hair salon. I don't think the hair salon had come in yet.
There was a little grocery store.
And there was a little grocery store.
Little furniture store.
So we had a little bit of it, but it was just a touch. And I realized we needed a full service restaurant. We needed office space. We needed more shops, and I couldn't raise the funds to do it. But fortunately, I was a big believer in Midtown Atlanta back when that was no man's land.
Yep.
And that was my first restaurant, eventually 4 restaurants and my corporate headquarters. So in the 70s, I bought property in Midtown that I still owned. And so I gradually started selling pieces of that to then build the commercial here.
Right.
And so here we have, what is this? This is, I think, 25,000 square feet that houses now the Hill restaurant and the various shops and offices. And so this was a real commercial center that was very viable and anchored the corner. And an important part that really said, this is a small town. This isn't a bedroom community. And that was just very important. And then the same thing as we were coming in, and that was 2007 we opened this.
Okay.
So we had that all done before the real recession hit. And so we had this restaurant open and gradually gained. Then we were coming out of the recession, and I realized that Grange needed that same place. And the little grocery store had ceased to exist, and we needed a bigger grocery store. And then Rausch was looking for a model house, and they chose Serenbe as the one place in the United States to do this. And through our conversations with them, we talked about the need for an experience center. So they said, well, where would you do that? And I thought, okay, we need a grocery store. We need the experience center. I just got to build a commercial area down in Grange.
Right.
And so again, I sold more of my Midtown property and built the first commercial buildings there.
Right.
And then our Montessori school we had was outgrowing. They were in a little house and they needed space. So I just stepped forward and built the next 2 storefronts for them as a temporary space. And so the need was there. And luckily I had the resources because I believed in Midtown when nobody else did.
Right.
That I could actually sell those properties to do that.
And the same things just happened. We just opened here in May of 2018. The newest commercial building, but that's in the 3rd neighborhood motto.
And here we are. I realized that we needed a office building to deal with health services. And I really wanted to distinguish between services that keep you vitally well versus services that address your sickness. And here again, it just became we just had to do this to demonstrate the difference both in how the building might look and the people that would be there. And again, everyone was looking, well, an office building?
Right.
Who's going to lease an office building? Even though we had examples on what we had, but it was all small scale and more small. And so again, I fortunately had an acre on Peachtree Street in Midtown, and I sold that to build the office building that we're just now have opened here in 2019.
Well, and now we have 5 restaurants that are throughout, including a sushi restaurant across the street from us here, a bookstore, a flower shop, a bike shop, design shops, galleries, hair salon, grocery store. And then the One Mata building, I don't even have time to list everything that's in there, but from Eastern and Western medicine, our latest restaurant, Halsa. I mean, it's
cycling centers, gyms, spas, yogas. I mean,
unbelievable.
And here we are.
Childcare,
We're just opening it, and we're 90% leased.
Which is so exciting. So exciting.
Yeah. So it's both in developing the community, in creating the commercial areas, it just becomes more and more evident the problems we have in the financial services requiring feasibility studies. And you can only get a feasibility study by looking in the rearview mirror. Right. Is what we've done in the past. So for all those people out there trying to do something forward thinking, they have to find private equity or have the resources to move forward. And that's, I think, a problem that we as a society need to figure out. And I don't know what the answer is because you can't fund everybody's dream, but there has to be some sense of being able to understand what does have merit to stand on its own without purely having to check the boxes on feasibility studies.
Yeah, no, that makes so sense.
We're in the very thing with, I have very specific ideas about senior housing, assisted living, memory care. And it's a whole concept we see in Scandinavia that, to my knowledge, does not exist in America. Right. But yet we can't see any way to fund this progressive approach.
Right. So tell me, I was going to ask you sort of like what's next, if you will, like sort of, what... I mean, obviously there's more houses and more neighborhoods, but sort of tell me, let's touch on that for a second. What's next in the senior housing? Because I know that you've traveled and you've tried to talk to everybody, doctors, physicians, assisted living, and it's almost like you're looking for this thing that doesn't exist. So tell me a little bit about, I know America versus European philosophies.
In America, maybe other parts of the world as well, we are so fear-based that we tend to put our children and our seniors in prison. You think about how we treat both. And, our kids are so sheltered that they are missing a lot of experiences. And Richard Louv with Last Child in the Woods has really brought this to the forefront of we're actually causing problems and damaging them rather than protecting them. But I think people are starting to talk about aging in America, but I'm not sure we've really delved into what's happening in our whole attitude of putting them into these facilities that are lockdowns. When most senior housing, you have to go through gates that would remind you of going through a prison gate. And I don't think we've really put those dots together.
Right.
Most people have an idea of senior housing, of trying to emulate a country club atmosphere or a fancy hotel.
Right.
And as you reach the end of your life, I'm not sure that that's the stimulating thing that people are wanting, especially as the baby boomers. I think my parents' generation, ahead of the baby boomers, that was post-World War II and the beginning of Social Security and the idea that people could retire in luxury as a whole concept that was introduced. And as the baby boomers have watched how their parents have dealt with that, I don't believe we see it as the thing we all want to aspire to. It's maybe, there's not one formula that fits all, but I think we're all going to stay much more engaged. And even as we start maybe losing our capacity, we're going to want something different. And I think a good example is in Sweden, going into a memory care. And they shared with me that at the end of life, the way you keep the brain engaged is very similar to the beginning of life, and primary colors are very important, those vivid, bright colors. And so they use that same palette when they're designing senior housing as well as nurseries. And so just imagine senior housing rather than these beautiful upholstered things with dark panels and all that, going in with red sofas and big yellow throw pillows and bright lights, a totally different look. But if your mind is changing, you want stimulation rather than luxury comfort. And so it's that approach in many ways that I think we can do something very different with our senior housing.
That's great. Well, Steve, thank you so much. This has been really interesting. And I, as a resident, I look forward to seeing it all sort of unfold over the years. On our next episode, we're going to talk about the arts a little bit more. And so we'll sort of dig in about the Serenbe Institute, which is a really integral part of the community as well that I don't think we've touched on. So thank you so much.
Great. It's great fun to remember these things.
Thank you for listening to Serenbe Stories. New episodes are available on Mondays. You can subscribe anywhere you listen to podcasts. For more details, visit our website, serenbestories.com.